David Gillanders, I'm the Executive Director at Pathways of Hope. In the context of a lot of what Bex was discussing, which is permanent supportive housing and the actual literal end to homelessness, as Helen so well put it, housing, right? So I came on, Pathways of Hope's been doing this work for about I'm 42, so 43 years. They started 1 year before I was born exactly, so appreciate that fact. And Pathways of Hope's been doing that work since 1975. Like I mentioned, we have a couple different campuses which have permanent housing, supportive housing, or transitional housing, and shelter housing. When we have a lot of resource centers and a lot of community-based work that we do around permanent supportive housing and things like that. That's just a very quick version. So we've been around for a long time, and we're pretty good at what we do. And I had the very distinct privilege and honor of becoming the executive director in 2017. And one of my first goals when I set out was I wanted to become an agency that was problem solvers. I wanted to morph ourselves into an agency where we had done a really good job sometimes managing homelessness, sometimes helping people end homelessness, but we needed to get better at actually ending homelessness, because that is the only cure for people who are experiencing homelessness, is to actually have their homelessness ended permanently, right? So when you fast forward a few months and I'm thinking about how we can get to this place where we can become this really effective change agency and really do this work of ending homelessness, and we had the federal lawsuit get filed in February of 2018. So immediately my wheels started turning, and my 5-year plan to become an agency that kind of converted itself into really providing housing for people and ending their homelessness now was accelerated, and had about 4 years cut off that plan because there became an opportunity to do that work now. And the lawsuit was going to drive a lot of that narrative. While the lawsuit is about housing, it's about shelter, and it's about making sure people have a place to stay that is an alternative to sleeping outside on a nightly basis. Really the end game, as Bex mentioned, is how do we find places for these people to permanently live so that they don't go back to being homeless, right? And we know, thanks to Dr. Snow and the cost study, there's 3 really good reasons for this. Well, we know because the cost study, there's one reason in particular, and that's cost savings. The other one it really alludes to is public health, right? We're a better, safer, healthier community for all of our members. If people who are homeless are housed, that's better for everyone. People that are homeless have the same rights. They are citizens just like we are, and we should all be trying to get them to be at a place where we are at in terms of our housing and our health. And then finally is the moral issue, right? So kind of packaging all of these things together and really wanting to be aggressive with this work, when the lawsuit was filed, I went to the city of Fullerton and I said, hey, this is our chance. Why don't we work together to find an opportunity to build permanent supportive housing inside the city of Fullerton? If you're familiar with Fullerton, well, Fullerton is where the Kelly Thomas murder happened in 2012. He was killed by police officers in front of the Fullerton train station. Fullerton has a long history of different complications with respect to its response to homelessness, to how it's managed its homeless problem, to how it's worked to end homelessness, to the services it's provided. And we think, we don't know for sure, we'll probably know more after the point in time count comes out, but we think there's about 400 people who live on the streets in or around Fullerton, around downtown Fullerton, and specifically every single day. So we have a significant issue in Fullerton that we need to address. Some of these are children, and we know there's a lot of children living in vehicles in Fullerton, which is also not acceptable. So when we approached the city of Fullerton with this idea, really it was in the context of, you have a problem and we solve this problem, why don't we work together to do it, right? It makes sense, right? And so we went to them to talk about pieces of land that they currently possessed in the city portfolio that they could potentially convert into some sort of development for permanent supportive housing. Now, there's a couple different opportunities inside our city boundaries. We call the 4 walls of Fullerton. Fullerton's a very interesting place. There's a lot of people who were born there, live their entire lives there, and will die there. And everybody knows each other. And that kind of is important and very germane to how this story really gets a little sideways. So we went to Fullerton and said, show us your parcels of land. How can we help you? We can work with a builder. We can get something done. And we finally found a piece of land that was along some railroad tracks that had been used for a city yard. It had had a couple of attempts on it to build supportive housing or affordable housing in the past. That had not gone well, but I think fortune favors the bold. So I don't really care what the history of the site was. I was going to try to take this on anyways with our agency. And we went for it. And just because we only got until about 350 or 450, and I want to let 350, and I want to let Jason talk to you. I'll kind of skip to the main point of this. Is we went through a long, kind of arduous process of trying to negotiate or to secure an exclusive negotiating agreement for that piece of land. And essentially what had happened is what should have been a pretty simple process of the city making the determination that a 2-acre piece of land that they owned that is a funky shape. It's a triangle with a very long side that goes along railroad tracks. It's bordered by a municipal building and Commonwealth, which if you're familiar with that part of the county, Commonwealth is a 4-lane street. It's extremely busy and it has a head-high median of bushes in the middle of it. So, and with the idea that this had close contact with the community, there are neighborhoods around. In fact, Jason lives in the neighborhood across the street. There was less impact on a community in this particular location than in a lot of other options. So we thought of it as the best option. Unfortunately, like I said, what should have been a simple process, it ended up on the 1-year anniversary of my employment. We had a hearing at City Hall that ended up being very contentious. I think we'll talk a little bit more about what we did wrong and what we could have done better, how the city could have done better for us, frankly, in order to make this process happen more smoothly. And then a lot about how people in the community did come out to support us and what we learned in the process. What I'll say just quickly before I turn it over to Jason to talk about his role in the process, because this is really where Jason and I became best buddies. We even kind of look alike. I mean, there's a lot going on here. We really are good buddies. But the thing we learned about this is that this process is very oriented towards essentially people who have something already not wanting to let go of a space that's not theirs. So what I mean by that is your common homeowner in a particular neighborhood really trying to dictate the terms on a piece of land that they have no stake in. I mean, they don't own it. It's near to them. It's important to them because it's part of their proximity. But in real terms, they don't get to dictate what goes on with that property, but people try to insert themselves in a process that makes it seem like they do. And I think that's an important stage setting for understanding exactly what it means when people who have means are telling people who are vulnerable and dying on the streets. We had 244 people in Orange County die last year on our streets, that they cannot have simple access to housing that will completely change their lives and probably save their lives. So I think that's a really important little bit of context setting that I like to do before I talk about more stuff later, I think. But for now, I'll turn it over to Jason.